However, before we dive into this long and haunting story, I'd like to invite you to take a moment. If you find stories like this captivating deep explorations into the darkest corners of human nature and unresolved mysteries, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to create more content, uncover complex worlds, and tell stories that capture your imagination. A simple click can help us continue this journey. Thank you, and now, let's step into the story. The air in Blackwood Creek, Montana, usually carried the scent of pine and crisp, unblemished air, a comforting perfume of the wild. But that autumn of 2007, a different scent began to permeate the small town, the acrid tang of fear, subtle at first, then undeniably potent. It started with whispers, then progressed to hushed conversations over morning coffee at Martha's Diner, and finally, to screams that echoed through the otherwise placid valleys. Blackwood Creek, with its population barely cresting 2,000, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where doors were left unlocked, and a stranger's car was noted with curious, not suspicious, interest. The local law enforcement consisted of Sheriff Brody Miller, a man whose face was etched with the weariness of 1,000 small-town squabbles and the quiet pride of upholding the peace in a place he deeply loved, and his single deputy, Sarah Jenkins, a sharp-witted young woman whose ambition to join the FBI was constantly at odds with her loyalty to her hometown. The first victim was Emily Thorne, a vibrant, artistic woman in her late 20s who ran the town's only pottery studio. Emily was found in her quaint, sun-drenched studio, surrounded by her unfinished creations. The scene was meticulous, almost artistic in its own macabre way. There was no sign of forced entry, no struggle. Emily was posed, seated at her potter's wheel, her hands still stained with clay, a serene, almost peaceful expression on her face, despite the deep, precise incision across her throat. Her blood had congealed into a dark, rich glaze on the wheel, ironically mirroring the very art she created. Sheriff Miller, a man who had seen his share of hunting accidents and barroom brawls, felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This wasn't a crime of passion or a random act of violence. This was something else entirely. The methodical nature, the almost reverent positioning of the body, it spoke of a chilling, calculating mind. "Brody, this ain't right," Deputy Jenkins said, her voice unusually subdued as she meticulously documented the scene. No signs of struggle, no rage. It's like he wanted her to look graceful. Miller grunted, his gaze sweeping the studio. He or she, Sarah. Don't jump to conclusions. But a part of him knew, with an unsettling certainty, that this was the work of a man with a deeply disturbing agenda. The town reeled. Emily was a beloved figure, her studio a hub of creativity and gentle conversation. Who could possibly want to harm her? Theories blossomed like wildflowers in spring, ranging from a jealous ex-lover Emily had no known enemies, let alone a scorned admirer to a transient passing through town, though Blackwood Creek rarely saw such drifters. The FBI was called in, a formality for such a shocking crime in a quiet community. Agent David Reed, a sharp, unsmiling man with a reputation for solving high-profile cases, arrived with his team. Reed was all business, his eyes constantly scanning, his mind always analyzing. He brought with him an air of sterile professionalism that felt alien and intrusive in Blackwood Creek. Reed's assessment mirrored Miller's unspoken fear. "This is not random, Sheriff. The perpetrator took their time. They knew what they were doing, and they left no trace other than the victim." Days turned into a week, then two. The initial shock began to morph into a pervasive sense of unease. People started locking their doors, a practice unheard of in Blackwood Creek. Children, usually free to roam the woods until dusk, were kept indoors. The Friday night football games, usually a boisterous community affair, were quieter, the cheers laced with a newfound anxiety. Then came the second victim, Samuel "Sam" Peterson, a grizzled, taciturn man in his late 50s who ran the local hardware store. Sam was a pillar of the community, gruff but kind, always ready with a helpful tip or a lending hand. He was found in his rustic cabin, nestled deep in the woods, a good 5 miles from town. Like Emily, there was no forced entry. Like Emily, Sam was posed. He was seated at his workbench, a half-finished birdhouse in his calloused hands, his eyes staring blankly at the tools scattered before him. A single, precise incision across his throat. The similarity was chilling. The methodical nature, the lack of struggle, the deliberate posing, it screamed of a signature. Agent Reed, his face grimmer than ever, called a town meeting. The community hall was packed, the air thick with fear and a burgeoning anger. "We have a serial killer on our hands," Reed stated, his voice cutting through the hushed murmurs. "The modus operandi is identical. The same precision, the same absence of forced entry, the same theatricality." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Serial killer. The words hung heavy, foreign and terrifying, in the clean mountain air. This was the stuff of big cities, of national news, not of their quiet, peaceful Blackwood Creek. Sheriff Miller, standing beside Reed, felt the weight of his town's fear press down on him. He had always prided himself on protecting his community. Now, a phantom menace stalked their streets, and he felt utterly helpless. He saw the trust in the eyes of his neighbors slowly eroding, replaced by a desperate plea for answers he didn't have. Deputy Jenkins, meanwhile, was poring over the case files, an almost manic energy driving her. She saw patterns where others saw only chaos. Emily, the artist, Sam, the craftsman, both creative, both makers. Was there a connection beyond their deaths? Was the killer making a statement through their victims or through their deaths? The FBI established a command center in the town hall, bringing in more resources, more agents. Blackwood Creek, once a picture of idyllic solitude, became a flurry of activity, its quiet beauty now marred by flashing lights and official vehicles. Roadblocks were set up, patrols increased, but the killer remained elusive, a ghost in the vast Montana landscape. The town went into lockdown. People rarely ventured out after dark. Businesses closed early. The once vibrant social fabric began to fray, replaced by suspicion and fear. Every stranger was eyed with caution, every familiar face with a lingering doubt. The killer had not only taken lives. They had stolen the town's innocence, its fundamental sense of security. As the leaves turned a fiery red and gold, painting the landscape in a breathtaking, yet unsettling beauty, the fear deepened. The whispers now carried a name, uttered in hushed tones, a name that struck terror into the hearts of Blackwood Creek residents. The Artisan. It was a macabre moniker, coined by a distraught local journalist, referring to the killer's meticulous, almost artistic presentation of the victims. The name stuck, a grim reminder of the horror that had befallen their tranquil haven. Sheriff Miller found himself haunted by the faces of Emily and Sam, by the emptiness in their eyes, and the chilling precision of their wounds. He drove the quiet roads at night, his hand instinctively resting on the holster of his service weapon, his eyes scanning the shadows, searching for a ghost he knew he might never catch. The silence of the nights, once comforting, now felt pregnant with menace, each rustle of leaves, each distant howl of a coyote, a potential prelude to another horror. Deputy Jenkins, often found working late into the night, her desk piled high with reports and maps, started noticing something subtle in the crime scene photos. Beyond the precise cuts and the meticulous posing, there was a faint, almost imperceptible scent in both locations, one that the initial forensic reports had dismissed as ambient. She couldn't quite place it, but it was floral, sweet, and oddly out of place in both a pottery studio and a hardware store. She mentioned it to Agent Reed, who, ever the pragmatist, filed it away under unconfirmed sensory observations. But for Sarah, it gnawed at her, a tiny, persistent thread in the tangled tapestry of the case. She felt a growing, desperate need to find a connection, a single thread that could lead them out of this labyrinth of fear before the Artisan struck again. The clock was ticking, and with each passing day, the shadow over Blackwood Creek grew longer and darker. The fear in Blackwood Creek had morphed from a low hum into a deafening roar. The Artisan, as the national media now sensationalized the killer, had struck again, and this time, the victim was someone intimately connected to the investigation. further deepening the psychological terror gripping the small Montana town. It was 3 weeks after Sam Peterson's murder when the news broke. Dr. Alan Finch, the amiable and highly respected town veterinarian, was found in his clinic. Dr. Finch was known for his gentle demeanor with animals and his wry wit, a comforting presence in the community. His disappearance had been noted when his usually bustling clinic remained dark and locked past opening hours. Sheriff Miller and Deputy Jenkins, their hearts heavy with a premonition, had forced entry. The scene was, by now, chillingly familiar. Dr. Finch was seated at his examination table, a small, sedated tabby cat cradled in his arms, as if mid-procedure. His eyes, usually kind and intelligent, were glazed over, fixed on some unseen point beyond the sterile walls of his clinic. The same precise incision, the same meticulous presentation. But this time there was a subtle, horrifying deviation. A single, pristine white lily lay carefully placed on his chest, its petals stark against his bloodied shirt. The lily. Deputy Jenkins immediately remembered her earlier, dismissed observation about a floral scent. She had mentioned it to Agent Reed, but now, with physical evidence, her hunch was validated. The killer wasn't just posing the victims. They were leaving a signature, a morbid flourish. Agent Reed, usually composed, showed a flicker of exasperation. A lily, classic symbolism, often associated with funerals, purity, rebirth. It tells us nothing about the killer's identity, only their dramatic flair. But Jenkins persisted. The scent, Agent Reed. I smelled it at Emily's studio and Sam's cabin. Faint, but it was there. This isn't just about symbolism. It's about a pattern, a unique signature we can trace. Reed, though skeptical, gave her a curt nod to investigate. Jenkins, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, immersed herself in researching the lily, its varieties, its cultivation, anything that might link it to their elusive killer. The community's trust in law enforcement began to waver. 3 victims, all seemingly unconnected, yet linked by the same gruesome MO. The pressure on Sheriff Miller was immense, his days a blur of fruitless leads and frustrated townspeople demanding answers. He felt the weight of their gaze, the silent accusation that he was failing them. The once unwavering respect in his eyes was slowly giving way to a desperate fear for his own family, for every soul in Blackwood Creek. The FBI, in a desperate attempt to gather information, released a composite sketch based on a vague description from a hiker who claimed to have seen a man with a dark hooded jacket near Sam Peterson's cabin days before his murder. The sketch was generic, almost an archetype of a shadowy figure, doing little to ease the town's anxieties. Instead, it fueled paranoia, making everyone suspicious of anyone who fit the broad description. Blackwood Creek, once a vibrant community, was now a ghost town after dark. Businesses struggled, as no one dared to venture out. The economic impact was almost as devastating as the emotional one. Schools saw a sharp decline in attendance, as parents, gripped by fear, chose to homeschool their children or leave town altogether. The once clear streams of community life were now muddied by suspicion and a deep-seated dread. Deputy Jenkins, working herself to exhaustion, found herself drawn to the lives of the victims. Emily, the artist, Sam, the craftsman, Dr. Finch, the healer of animals, all contributed to the well-being and beauty of the town in their own unique ways. All, in a sense, were creators, people who brought something tangible or intangible into existence. Was that the connection? Was the killer targeting those who created, those who nurtured? She pored over local archives, searching for any common thread that might have intersected their lives. She looked at property records, school yearbooks, church registries. Nothing. Their paths, while coexisting in Blackwood Creek, had never significantly crossed beyond routine town interactions. Meanwhile, Agent Reed focused on the forensic evidence, hoping for a breakthrough. Despite the meticulousness of the crime scenes, surely the killer had made a mistake, left some microscopic trace. But the perpetrator was exceptionally careful. No fingerprints, no DNA, no fibers. It was as if the artisan existed outside the physical world, leaving only the chilling artistry of their kills. One evening, while reviewing the case files for the 100th time, Jenkins noticed a minor detail, almost insignificant, in the initial police report from Emily Thorne's murder. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, had reported seeing a pale green sedan, older model, not from around here, driving slowly past Emily's studio late the night before her body was discovered. The detail had been dismissed at the time as merely a car passing through. But now, with the Lily as a signature, Jenkins' mind made a frantic leap. Pale green. Lily. Could there be a connection? She cross-referenced all local vehicle registrations for pale green sedans, finding none matching Mrs. Gable's description. Then she expanded her search to neighboring counties, a tedious and time-consuming process. Days later, she found a hit. A pale green 1998 Chevrolet Malibu registered to a post office box in a small town about 50 miles east of Blackwood Creek, a town called Ravenwood. The name on the registration was Alistair Finch. Not related to Dr. Alan Finch as far as she could tell, but the surname caught her attention. It was a long shot, but it was the first tangible lead they had, however tenuous. She presented her findings to Agent Reed, who, for the first time, showed a flicker of genuine interest. Alistair Finch. Finch. Dr. Finch. Coincidence? Or is our killer playing games? A small team, including Sheriff Miller, Deputy Jenkins, and Agent Reed, drove to Ravenwood. The address registered to the P.O. box was a dilapidated, abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town, swallowed by overgrown weeds and a palpable sense of decay. Inside, it was bare, dusty, and clearly uninhabited for years. It was a dead end, a false flag, likely used by the killer to obscure their true identity. The disappointment was crushing. The brief flicker of hope was extinguished, leaving behind an even deeper sense of despair. The killer was not only meticulous in their crimes but also cunning in their efforts to remain invisible. As the weeks dragged on, with no new leads and the fear reaching a fever pitch, the FBI began to consider pulling out. Their resources stretched thin across the country. Agent Reed, though frustrated, knew that without any new evidence, their presence in Blackwood Creek was becoming unsustainable. The town, once so welcoming, was now a place of suspicion and unspoken accusation. The very air was heavy with the expectation of another tragedy, another posed victim, another white lily. Sheriff Miller felt a cold certainty in his gut. The killer wasn't done. He felt it in the way the wind rustled through the pines, in the way the shadows danced in his peripheral vision. He knew the artisan would strike again, and soon. The meticulously crafted terror, the chilling precision, the morbid beauty of their signature, it was all building to a crescendo, a final, horrifying act that would undoubtedly shatter Blackwood Creek forever. He just prayed they would find the killer before that final, devastating note was played. The art of disappearance was becoming the art of slow, psychological torture for an entire town, and the stage was set for the next inevitable act. The winter descended upon Blackwood Creek with a ferocity that mirrored the town's collective despair. Snow blanketed the landscape, turning the once vibrant colors of autumn into a stark, monochrome tableau. The silence was broken only by the biting wind and the unspoken dread that hung heavy in the frigid air. The FBI, true to Agent Reed's earlier concerns, scaled back their presence, leaving Sheriff Miller and Deputy Jenkins to grapple with the increasingly desperate situation. The national media had moved on, chasing other sensational headlines, but for Blackwood Creek, the nightmare was far from over. The fourth victim was Sarah Jenkins' worst fear realized. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the town's beloved librarian, a woman whose gentle smile and vast knowledge had shaped generations of Blackwood Creek's children, was found in her home. Eleanor was not just a librarian. She was a quiet historian, a keeper of stories, and a fount of local wisdom. She was found in her armchair, a worn copy of Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island open on her lap, a half-finished cup of tea on the table beside her. A single white lily rested on the book, its petals already starting to brown at the edges. This time, the MO had a subtle but significant deviation. The precise incision was still there, across her throat, but her spectacles, usually perched on her nose, were carefully placed on the top of the lily. It was a small detail, but to Jenkins, it felt like a direct taunt, a personal message from the killer to the investigators, a chilling declaration of their continued control. "He's getting bolder," Miller said, his voice a low growl of frustration and grief. Eleanor had been a friend, a mentor. The personal toll of these murders was wearing him down, etching new lines of worry onto his already tired face. Jenkins, however, felt a surge of cold, focused anger. The spectacles, the treasure island, the floral scent. She reviewed everything. Emily, the artist, Sam, the craftsman, Dr. Finch, the healer, Eleanor, the keeper of stories, the nurturer of minds. All, in their own ways, were creators, people who enriched the lives of others, who built, mended, and inspired. And then it hit her, a connection that had been lurking in the periphery of her subconscious, a faint echo from years past. The victims, beyond being creators, shared another, more profound, and incredibly specific link. They were all members of the Blackwood Creek Historical Society, a small, close-knit group dedicated to preserving the town's past. Furthermore, all four had been instrumental in opposing a controversial land development project 2 decades ago, a project that would have demolished a significant portion of Blackwood Creek's historic downtown, including the old library and Emily Thorne's ancestral home. They had won, preserving the town's heritage against the wishes of a powerful out-of-town developer. Jenkins felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. This wasn't random. This wasn't about simple creation. This was about retribution. Someone held a deep, festering grudge against those who had thwarted the development. She rushed to Sheriff Miller, her eyes wide with a desperate, burgeoning hope. "Sheriff, the Historical Society. The development project 20 years ago. They all opposed it. They were the leading voices against it." Miller, startled by her sudden intensity, looked at her, his brows furrowed. "That old project? The one the Caldwell Group tried to push through? What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," Jenkins exclaimed, grabbing a dusty file from the archives, the old Planning Commission records. The Caldwell Group had a local representative, a land acquisition manager. His name was Arthur Sterling. He was ruthless, relentless. He lost everything when the project failed. He was humiliated, run out of town. Arthur Sterling. The name stirred a faint memory in Miller's mind, a shadowy figure from a distant past, a man whose ambition had been crushed by the stubborn will of Blackwood Creek. "Where is he now?" Miller asked, a new urgency in his voice. Jenkins had already anticipated the question. "He disappeared. No forwarding address, no trace. But I remember seeing a news article years ago, a small piece in the regional paper, about a man fitting his description who had suffered a severe accident, a fire, out of state. He was barely recognizable, but he survived." The pieces began to click into place with terrifying clarity. The meticulousness, the planning, the absolute lack of forensic evidence, a man who had lost everything, who had been physically and psychologically scarred, now returning to exact a brutal, long-delayed revenge. The artisan wasn't just a killer. He was a maestro of vengeance. They tracked down the hospital records, finding Arthur Sterling's name. He had undergone extensive reconstructive surgery, his face forever altered by the fire. He had indeed moved to a small town, Ravenwood, about 50 miles east of Blackwood Creek. The pale green sedan, registered to a P.O. box in Ravenwood, the abandoned farmhouse, it had all been a diversion, a carefully laid trail of smoke and mirrors. He was living in plain sight, just far enough away not to draw attention, yet close enough to observe, Miller muttered, the realization dawning on him. He had a different face, a different identity, but the same burning hatred. They compiled a profile of Arthur Sterling, a man consumed by bitterness and a warped sense of justice. The precise cuts, the careful posing, the lilies, it was all part of his elaborate theatrical performance. A twisted display of power over those who had once stripped him of his own. The spectacles on Eleanor Vance, the book Treasure Island, a story about a map to hidden riches, it was a subtle nod to the treasures he believed Blackwood Creek had stolen from him and the maps to his victims. Miller and Jenkins, accompanied by a smaller FBI team that Agent Reed had begrudgingly redeployed after hearing their compelling new lead, mobilized. They knew their time was short. Sterling had escalated with each murder, making bolder statements, leaving more personalized signatures. He was building to a grand finale. Their search for Sterling led them to an isolated cabin, even deeper in the Montana wilderness than Sam Peterson's. It was a long, arduous trek through the heavy snow, the silence of the woods amplifying their every breath. The cabin, rustic and unassuming, showed signs of recent habitation. As they approached, they heard a faint, haunting melody drifting from within a classical piece, somber and beautiful. The lights were on. Miller exchanged a grim look with Jenkins. He was home. They breached the cabin with precision, weapons drawn, the cold night air rushing in behind them. The scene inside was a macabre stage. Arthur Sterling, his reconstructed face a mask of serene contentment, was seated at a meticulously crafted wooden desk, surrounded by maps of Blackwood Creek, old blueprints of the failed development project, and a chilling collection of personal effects from his victims Emily's small, unglazed pot, Sam's favorite carving tool, Dr. Finch's antique stethoscope, and Eleanor's spectacles, which he was polishing with a soft cloth. A single, large white lily sat in a vase on the desk, its pristine beauty a stark contrast to the darkness it represented. He looked up, not with surprise, but with an almost serene acceptance, as if he had been expecting them, as if his performance was finally complete. The classical music swelled, filling the cabin with its melancholic beauty. "Sheriff Miller," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, almost gentle. "Deputy Jenkins, you finally found me. I knew you would. Eventually." "Arthur Sterling," Miller said, his voice hard, filled with a mixture of relief and disgust. "It's over." Sterling smiled, a slow, chilling curve of his lips. "Is it? The play has ended, yes. But the message lives on." He gestured around the cabin at the collected mementos, the maps. "They thought they could simply take what was mine, destroy my vision, my future. They built their lives on the ashes of my ambition. Now they are the art. Their lives, meticulously extinguished, are my final, perfect creation." He made no move to resist, simply allowing them to apprehend him. As they cuffed him, Sterling's gaze drifted to Jenkins. "The lily, deputy. You noticed. Good. A symbol of peace, of purity. A testament to the stillness I brought them, after their lives of creating chaos." The arrest of Arthur Sterling brought a hesitant, fragile sense of relief to Blackwood Creek. The nightmare of the artisan was over, but the scars remained. The town had lost its innocence, its trust, and its cherished sense of security. In the aftermath, Jenkins found herself standing by Emily Thorne's pottery studio, now a memorial, adorned with flowers and candles. The faint scent of pine and crisp air had returned, but it was forever tinged with the memory of fear and loss. She realized that while the killer was caught, the shadow he cast would linger for generations, a grim reminder that even in the most peaceful corners of the heartland, darkness could take root, fester, and bloom into something truly horrifying. Blackwood Creek had learned a harsh truth. Some wounds, no matter how meticulously cleaned, would never truly heal. The art of the killer had been a masterpiece of despair, and its legacy would be etched into the very soul of the town, an enduring whisper of the fear that had once consumed them.